Light pollution news, October 2025. Barely tacked. This is going to be a good one. You won't want to miss it. This episode, why doesn't religion embrace the night sky? And is astrourism at its highest peak? We cover some health and ecology articles this episode, along with some listener feedback. I welcome back to the show astronomer James Lowenthal, the host of the Night Sky Tourist podcast, Vicky Derksen, and lawyer researcher Yana Yakushina. This is a fun one. Let's kick it off. Welcome to another Light Pollution News. I'm your host, Bill McGeaney. We do this show twice a month discussing the news around our vanishing nighttime environment. I'd like to welcome any new listeners with us today. Thank you for tuning in. As a reminder, you can find everything we discuss about today by heading over to lightpollutionnews.com. You won't have to go far. The show will be up on our homepage. All the links, read-alongs, summaries you want to find out about that we're discussing today's show will sit right there at your fingertips. If you like what you hear today, you like the work we do, why not support the show? Your support goes a very long way to help us take care of the business side of these episodes month in and month out. And at this point, you guys are making up around half of our operating expenses. So thank you. Thank you so much for that. If you're interested in learning more, simply click the support the show link on your podcast player, show notes, or over at our website. You can go to lightpollutionnews.com and it should be a support the show link. I don't have the exact address on that, but it's very easy to find. Now, occasionally I do get it wrong, and I want to bring up something that I misspoke about on a prior show. I need to make a correction regarding a study detail from a couple of shows back. The lead study that came through earlier this year looked at a time period of 2005 through 2013, not 2018 through 2025. During the former years, the conversion included a switch away from high-pressure sodium to white high-pressure sodium lighting. So the study actually looked at changes as it pertains to crime with high-pressure sodium lighting, changing the color of the lighting, not the LEDs. This is my fault. I apologize to you, listener. Leeds did undergo an LED conversion from 2018 through to 2025. So that part and the cost of the conversion I got right. I just had messed up on the actual details of the study itself. Let me welcome back three guests. You know them, you love them, and you probably have subscribed to maybe one of them. And that is Vicky Derksen is the first one I'm going to introduce today. And Vicky is the host of the Night Sky Tourist, which operates as an astrourism company, and you have a podcast that's attached to that actual tourist piece. So why don't you tell us what made you decide to start Night Sky Tourist?
I'm going to go back to my childhood, Bill.
I don't have any music for that. I don't have a transition.
I grew up in northern Idaho, and I thought that everybody everywhere saw the Milky Way. And then I got married and I moved to Phoenix. And I remember telling my husband one night, it's kind of weird here because it doesn't really get all the way dark. And so then I moved out to Fountain Hills on the edge of Phoenix and got some of my stars back. And I remember thinking as my kids were starting to grow up, I was like, I really want my kids to know the sky better than I did, because even though I saw the Milky Way, I couldn't identify anything beyond the moon and the Big Dipper. So I started teaching naked eye astronomy in my community, and then I got roped into the Fountain Hills Dark Sky Association. So I got to participate in helping our town gain its designation as an international dark sky community. And at some point, I just felt like I wanted to do more. I love to write. I love to talk with people. And so that's when I kind of launched Night Sky Tourist. It started as a blog all by itself at first. And then I added the podcast. And now I own a stargazing business. And I'm writing a book about night sky experiences on Highway 89, which originally ran from Mexico to Canada. So I don't know. I think it just kind of grabbed hold of me and ran away with me. So
tell us about the Highway 89. I've come across that, and I'm not really being on the East Coast. It doesn't resonate with me. So why don't you explain that one?
It's one of the first U.S. highways that connected from the border to border going from north to south. And what's really fascinating about it is that there are 7 national parks along this route. So you've got Saguaro National Park, Grand Canyon, Bryce Canyon, Zion, Grand Teton, Yellowstone, and Glacier, all along this route. And that doesn't even include national monuments and state parks and things like that along this route. And many of them are designated dark sky parks, dark sky communities. And so a lot of observatories, especially in Arizona, you're going to have a lot of opportunities to visit observatories and things like that. So it is a stargazer's paradise from top to bottom.
To check that out. Add that to the list for next year, right? Also back with us today, she's always working on some new policy proposal, analysis. Actually, you're just always working. Yana Yakushina, you are a true lawyer and researcher in the most precise, determined meaning of that phrase. And you're just an all-around smart, fun person to talk with. So thank you for joining us again today. How is life over there in Europe right now?
Hi, everyone. Bill, thank you for having me again. The life is good. Life is moving. We recently developed the policy brief with my colleagues from the project, which I'm coordinating with some other folks, which is called Plan B. And we're trying to urge European Union to reduce light pollution. We developed 10 main key points, which they have to do as the first steps, and hopefully to make it work.
Yana, why is it called Plan B? Why don't you just give us a little quick run through on Plan B?
Let's put it that way. I wasn't behind the naming of it. I was against it because, in my millennial opinion, it's overused. But I'm the youngest in the whole project, so I didn't have enough to say. But the idea of Plan B is, so basically we're working on better understanding on the impacts of light and noise pollution on terrestrial biodiversity and ecosystem services. Then analyzing, discussing what can be the innovative approaches to reduce both light and noise pollution, and obviously developing, based on that, science-based policies and regulations. So that's shortly. It's mainly for the EU, but with the policy calls, at least for light pollution, I'm trying to make it rather global, to make it as general as possible, and then we can define more specific when you work with your national government. But I think my policy brief so far is pretty reusable.
Excellent. Where can people find more about Plan B, just out of curiosity?
For the Plan B, we have a website. We also have a YouTube channel. It's better to Google Plan B EU project because when you just Google Plan B, you'll find a lot of other things. We use as main channel our website, and we have pretty well-developed LinkedIn. And we also have a newsletter, which you can find either on website or LinkedIn. So we try to share as many things as possible.
And that LinkedIn is very active. So if you at home are curious about it, check out LinkedIn. If you're curious about Yana, check out LinkedIn. You'll find her pretty much wherever you're looking. Lastly, I have Mary Elizabeth Moses, Professor of Astronomy at Smith College and the Chair of Light Pollution Subcommittee of the American Astronomical Society for the Protection of Astronomy and the Space Environment. That is one of the longest titles. Is there an acronym for it? Is
COMPAS. Yeah, we chose it carefully. We went through a whole long process to figure out how to name that committee. It used to be worse, Bill. Can I tell you what it used to be?
Yes, please.
It used to be LP-RISD. That was the acronym, which just, it was like anti-resonating with people. That's why we changed it to COMPAS. It stood for Light Pollution, Radio Interference, and Space Debris. We would give it the shorthand, the Triple Threat Committee, because it was pack more punch. But now it's just COMPAS.
Oh, that's great. Well, James Lowenthal, thank you again for joining us. I really appreciate your knowledge and expertise here. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here, Bill.
So, Vicky, I want to start off with this article. Well, actually, it's not an article. It's a little anecdote. I'm going to bring it up in a second because me and my wife were out on vacation. We went out for our anniversary out to Sequoia and Kings Canyon, which is in kind of central California in the Sierras. And up in the Sierras, they actually had a dark sky festival going on. And we had no idea about when we got there. We started seeing these pamphlets. Got this dark sky festival pamphlet here. It started showing up. And it was one of the most interesting, unique finds that you don't expect to see when you're at a park. And unfortunately, we didn't get to see a lot of the activities. We had to kind of go into the backcountry because we were going out to Ray Lakes and doing some backpacking out there. But there were some interesting programs on here. There were about 35 different events. One of them included yoga, constellation yoga, which the flow through the myth of Perseus as told by the constellations, bringing the ancient story to life on your yoga mat. I can't imagine what happens when you hit Pegasus in that one, but sure, we can go with it. They had Kelly Lipo of the James Webb Telescope as a keynote. They had everything from visual observing to Native American heritage stories and discussions, and even discussions on artificial light at night. And I want to share these too, because I am a recovering craft brewery industry person. So there were beers that were sold, and there were a couple of them. One was this guy here, Hello Darkness, my old friend, which came from brewery out in Sacramento. And then there was another one, which unfortunately I don't have readily available on top of my screen. They actually brewed a beer specifically for the event that was a dark sky beer, and it was really cool. We're starting to see kind of, more excitement around this. When I was in craft beer industry, it felt like in 2012, 2013, the excitement was kind of building and building and building until it became very oversaturated, and then things kind of bled away. But I kind of can't help but feel the same way about dark skies. Right now we're in this build-up area, this build-up time when people are discovering it. It's a new thing. Nighttime is a new thing for a lot of people. Do you feel like we're in the cusp of reaching the highest point it's ever going to be?
With attention to dark skies specifically, or astrodome?
Well, attention to dark skies, where astrotourism's taking off, like the excitement. When I see people out there, when you go to these events, people are really thrilled to see the dark sky.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just tell you that you're going to be really happy to know that in Flagstaff, Arizona, which is the world's first international dark sky community, and it's also home of Lowell Observatory, where Pluto was discovered in 1930, there is a dark sky brewing company.
I love that. That's great.
And they'll do the same thing. They'll create craft beers specific for events that are happening there. I think right now, this week, as we're recording, Flagstaff has their annual Flagstaff Science Festival, and they always have some kind of a beer for that. They do an I Heart Pluto Festival, and they'll create a beer for that. And so, yeah, the breweries are loving to get involved in this. But I have to say, in owning a stargazing business, I see the astrotourism momentum is still very, very strong, at least here in this part of the country. I see that it's very strong. I'm seeing the interest that people have. Here's the thing. There are still so many people that I encounter through my business and through dark sky advocacy where they're just now discovering the night skies. So, yeah, there's been a huge influx over that over the last 10 years, but we've barely tapped into it yet. And so what I'm seeing in my business is that resorts are even now really ramping up their efforts to add more stargazing programs, parks, just like what you just did. A lot of the national parks are still really ramping up their festivals. A lot of new places are adding new festivals. This year I had a goal of trying to have the biggest list online of dark sky festivals and stargazing festivals that I could find. Anytime I see anything, boom, it goes on that list. It just keeps growing. And a lot of these are inaugural events. And so I really do think that there's still a huge interest in this, and that there are still people who are just now discovering it. So like here in Arizona and Utah, there's clear sky resorts. These are these glass geodesic domes that you can go and stay in so that while you're laying in bed at night, you can look up at the night sky. And they have a facility right outside of Grand Canyon National Park, and another one right outside of Bryce Canyon National Park. And I'm sure they're going to keep growing. Maybe you guys have heard of Under Canvas. I don't know if that is more of a Western United States thing, but it's like glamping, these really cool canvas tents. And they're setting up near national parks that are dark sky parks and promoting the whole stargazing thing. So I think that we're not slowing down yet. And all of the media over the last 2 years keep saying that Astrotourism is one of the fastest growing trends of the tourism industry. So I think maybe you and I have gotten really used to seeing it, but there's still so many people who are just now starting to experience it.
Can I ask you a question about those glass domes? How does it work in the daytime? Like, is it a crock pot? Like, what's going on in there?
Well, first of all, they're located in places that don't get too terribly hot, but they do have like these really cool curtains that you can pull across. So like that would come in really handy if it was a full moon night. You don't want that shining in your eyes. So you can pull a curtain across, and it's climate controlled inside. There's a brand new place up in Colorado called Cosmos Stargazing Resort and Spa. So talk about fancy pants stuff. There's just a lot of those things still coming online.
We'll know when we get there, when we get the saturation, when you can look at one of the original articles for you at home, who I changed it out before the show, but it was Lowe's Resort, I think in Tucson. And they do this thing, and James, I'm sure you're going to laugh at this because you probably see it all the time. There are these things called reflector telescopes, and the media loves to put the eyepiece in the wrong side. So that way, if you're actually using it, you're looking at your feet instead of the sky. And I think we'll actually know when we made it, like when this movement, when you, Vicky, have, done your job, when people actually put those pictures of those telescopes in the right position. So they're not staring at the feet the whole time.
I work with the resort in my town, which will remain unnamed so I don't point out the guilty. They bring in their social media managers and their marketing managers to come and take these photos, and they've done the exact same thing. Because there's people, they're hired outsiders who come in, they don't know the first thing about it. So yeah, I've seen that before.
Let me add to Vicky's excellent response another way that we'll know that we've made it. And I completely agree. We are definitely on the rising side of this tide. And Bill, you've been doing this for a long time, I know, and you're deeply immersed in it. And I think Vicky's probably right that, you can maybe convince yourself that it's slowing down. I think we are just at the beginning in some ways. I feel as if the dark sky movement internationally is very much in a growing phase. And the evidence for it includes what Vicky just mentioned about astrotourism. It also includes the fact that light pollution is growing fast. We'll know we've made it when we are turning that around on large scales. There are some cities and towns that have turned it around already, and we've mentioned a few of them already, like Flagstaff, but there are many more to go. And internationally, light pollution continues to grow at something like 10% a year, according to the citizen science work that used the globe at night, 50,000 citizen science observations. It is the goal of the International Astronomical Union's Commission on Site Protection, meaning protection of observatory sites. It is the goal of the Dark and Quiet Skies conferences and reports. It's the goal of the American Astronomical Society and virtually all others to stop the growth of light pollution and to turn it around, to bring back darkness at night. And that has happened in precious few places. But I feel as if the movement is growing. We have some catching up to do. And when we start turning around more places and those become really part of the public consciousness so that everybody knows what light pollution is. We're not there yet. Everybody needs to know what it is. Everybody needs to know what the benefit of darkness is. We're not there yet. That's when we'll know we've made it.
Just to add a small note, I think dark sky tourism is generally growing internationally. Like as we see, it gets included into different policies in Australia and New Zealand or India and also in Europe. And I think what is also important here, we have such a category is city fatigue, which is very big in Europe. And people tend to go to remote areas to get this calm experiences. And this is why we see a lot of dark sky parks has yoga retreats together with like astronomical observations. And it's going pretty big. So I think it's only will keep growing rather than decreasing.
Well, this may be a sign that, maybe it could be saturating in some parts. Yana, you wanted to talk about, so let's jump into it. Let's kick off the show with a piece that we weren't able to include last show, but it's not odd to have religious articles and cultural pieces that come through. And last time was around 2024, I think we had a pastor down in Alabama who wrote a really good detailed piece about artificial light at night and its impacts on the spiritualism, in this case, Christianity, its impacts on how Christians actually interact with their environment and see the world. And then there was another piece that we had, a Michigan pastor. He actually had light controls on his parking lot and the church lighting, so that way you could dim it and turn it off completely so they could all watch the Northern Lights together. Well, this one's a little different. It comes to us from the imaginative conservative, which really leans into its Christian heritage. In this case, it is Roman Catholicism, which, as a side note, here in Philly, Roman Catholic Church's properties like fields and schools and the sports fields and schools and all this stuff is probably one of the highest offenders of light pollution. That being the case, here we go, y'all. Let's jump into it. This piece titled Light Pollution as Antichrist. The title is interesting. It's Columba Silva's thesis was a little different from it. So that is inside this bubble that we sit in our lit cities, in our bright neighborhoods. We only see around 100 stars a night. And during this time, us humans tend to buy into this, to what the author describes as a lie, that we're evolution's greatest achievements. Everything that we do is amazing and great, and that we overvalue ourselves and buy into this myth of kind of our navel-gazing myth. So Yana, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I found these articles very interesting. Actually, I'm always glad to see new groups of people get involved in this light pollution communities. Because, I mean, it's all started with just astronomers, and now we see people who are like super religious talking about it. I mean, I don't have a very strict opinion about it, but I think it's very important to see, first of all, new groups getting involved in the issue and raise awareness in their own communities. And the second part here, it's about connectivity. A lot of light pollution advocates were talking about connectivity with nature, connectivity with dark skies, and we talk about indigenous practices, right? And here as well, when we talk about the religion, I think for people who are very religious, it's very important to see the dark skies, and for them it's a connectivity with God. And I think when we're removing the dark skies by introducing light pollution, we're kind of removing this connectivity. So I think in that sense, it's very important to talk about it as well. Maybe we should also think to include religious groups to more raise awareness more, because these groups are very big. And I never thought about it, by the way. So it was something new for me as well.
I grew up in a very religious home. My views have evolved over the years. But when I was younger, I was taught, from in the book of Genesis, it talks about how the sun and the moon and the stars were placed by God for signs and seasons. And so when, of course, different people had different interpretations of what that meant. But when I think about it today, it really boggles my mind that all of Christendom isn't doing something to try to protect the night sky. Because most of the people, whether they're religious or not, they don't even know that the constellations appear seasonally. And so for their scripture to say that the stars, sun, moon, and stars are put there for signs and seasons, they don't know anything about it. They don't have the context for what that even means. And so I can't imagine how that scripture can even mean anything to them. And so I found that article very, very interesting in light of you talking about this particular church that was one of the most lit up in town, whereas you would think that Christendom would be the most interested in protecting it because of what their sacred scriptures say.
It brings up an interesting possibility to actually start, or let's say join an existing, because there were beginnings of it already, campaign specifically to bring religious institutions on board with protection of the night. It's happened in small pockets. I'm not aware of it happening large scale, but Vicky, I think it would be, it's such a, I love what you said. It boggles the mind that they're not already doing that. Well, we can help make that happen. Here in Massachusetts, where we have perennially a dark sky bill pending in the legislature, we're the only New England state that has never passed statewide regulation of outdoor light at night. We've tried to do we've done a lot of coalition building. We've worked very, very hard to build a strong coalition with environmental groups and human medical establishment and zoos and museums of science and education institutions and politicians and religious institutions. So we've reached out to dozens of churches and synagogues and mosques around the state, asking them to sign on in support of dark skies. that may be the first time they've ever heard of this. They might have terrible lighting themselves, but just the act of getting them to sign on, that it plants that seed.
Were they receptive to it? What was their response?
Just lukewarm, and it's going to take work. It's such an uphill battle getting legislation passed in Massachusetts that we are in some ways, we're now strategizing where to put our efforts, and it continues to be in the coalition building. So that part will remain. Whether we focus so much on the legislation, probably less of our energy will go there. But we're going to continue to reach out to those institutions. My philosophies of advocacy is take the time and effort to understand what the values are of the people you're talking with and try to find some common ground there. And clearly the common ground here is awe and wonder. And whether you believe that the stars and the rest of nature were created by the hand of God or just happened through some, godless nature, they still inspire awe and wonder in us humans. And certainly that is part of the value system that many religious people experience and celebrate and seek. And I think that is our common ground.
And I've often thought that, when you go into rural areas, which tend to be much more religious in general, they tend to have much higher practicing individuals in religion by percentage than, say, like in an urban area. Part of that's because you get to see your environment. Right. Part of it is because you're out there. Part of it is because you have that connection. And since we're talking about religion, I want to also bring up, my intent wasn't to make Catholicism look bad. I was just saying here in Philly, their lands, the things they own are horribly lit. And that's on them. It's not on the church, big C itself. It's on the individual diocese here. Since we're talking about religion, Vatican astronomer Brother Guy Casamano approves of the New Zealand dark sky sanctuaries. Brother Guy, who's best known for his Turn Left at Orion book, a book that many people have read and many people have enjoyed. Light pollution robs everyone around you from being able to see the glorious nighttime sky, the sky that can give you a sense of perspective, that can be consoling or a little bit frightening, depending on where you are and what you're doing. He also goes on to reference a quote by late Pope Benedict. We humans create light that binds us to God's light. So there you have it. There you have some direct tie-in, Vicky. And side note, I got to meet his co-author for that book. I was randomly at Cherry Springs, and he was across the street. He's a geologist, and he taught me some lunar geology when we were hanging out there. It was a pretty good time. So I'm going to go through some health news, and then we'll get to some environmental news. And before we get back into the astrourism world, which I know Vicky's very excited to jump into. The study environmental research looked at whether night affected myopia in children and adolescents. They took a sample of 872 children aged 6 to 14 years old. Researchers found that when exposed to light in a sleeping environment, there is greater risk for myopia than in a dimly lit environment. Conversely, when exposed to dim light before waking up, there's a greater risk of myopia than when exposed to bright light before waking up. The association appeared to favor girls, of which there was a 50-50 split in the sample size, and was more noticeable in those whom supposedly engaged in a healthy lifestyle, which I don't think this is crazy. It kind of mimics the natural circadian rhythm where you want bright days and dark nights.
I read a really interesting book last year. It's called Chasing the Sun. I pulled it out to show it to you guys. Chasing the Sun, How the Science of Sunlight Shapes Our Bodies and Mind by Linda Geddes. It talked so much about this that I thought was so interesting. She described what happens with the circadian rhythm. And, we're getting the wrong amount of light at the wrong time of the day, and it's messing with us. So I can't speak specifically to myopia. I don't know a lot about it, but what you read about that really fits in very nicely with what she wrote about this book. And she was saying that our bodies and our circadian rhythm rely very heavily on bright sunlight first thing during the day. Because when that bright sunlight reaches your eyes first thing during the day, it triggers this whole cascade of hormones in our body that we need to flip on and flip off all throughout different parts of the day. And it all gets set up right there in the morning with that bright sunlight. And one of the things that I just thought was so interesting, because I had not learned this before, is that one of the things that needs to get built up pretty rapidly before noon is serotonin. Because then at the end of the day, as the sun sets, and our bodies want to start creating melatonin, it doesn't just create melatonin, it's also taking the excess serotonin and converting that to melatonin. But when we're not getting enough daylight, in our eyes, then we're not getting enough to convert into melatonin, which I just thought was so interesting. And then at night, it's not dark enough. I have a little light meter that on my iPhone, you can measure lux, that's the illuminance. And in the book, she was saying that being outside in direct natural sunlight the lux is 100,000 lux of illuminance. And the full moon is less than 1. So it's interesting because some of the studies that like you shared with us from the articles and stuff talked about how the studies that they did for nighttime and with this myopia stuff, that they were testing it at a lux of 5 or 10, which is still even higher than the full moon. Yeah, we need our natural darkness, and we need to go outside in the daytime.
I don't know if you've, on a previous show, discussed the book The Light Doctor, or if you've had Martin Edmore, the author of that book, on your show. Please add it to your discussion. He talks extensively about many of the things Vicky just said, and has led a lot of the research. He's a Harvard researcher who led the sleep lab there and trained a lot of the researchers who themselves went on to become leaders. This whole field has really exploded in the last 20 years. And the paper you cited about myopia, I have to admit I had a little trouble grasping exactly what the result was just from the abstract. I just didn't have time to go and dig deeper. But it is adding to literally thousands of articles in the scientific literature just in the last couple of years or the last decades on chronobiology and specifically sensitivity of circadian rhythms to light. And it's a huge industry in the good sense of research.
I was going to say, yeah, I think our streetlights probably have 100,000 lux. I mean, you stand underneath these things are, bright. I feel like they could radiate you. But anyway, one thing is certain, the lighting color, right? That plays a factor in things. And a study from PLOS One looked at a sample. It's a small sample of folks, 76. They studied them for 20 minutes. This isn't a phenomenal study here, but it is interesting. They studied them for about 20 minutes under different colored street lights. The lights used an implementation of 2700 Kelvin, 4000 Kelvin, and 6500 Kelvin. And researchers looked at that color temperature and noticed that it had no effect on feelings of safety for these individuals, but the individuals preferred the 2700 Kelvin lighting. Apparently, the 6500 Kelvin lighting also reduced stress hormones, which they didn't anticipate on seeing. So that's interesting that it actually reduced stress hormones more than 4000 or the 2700 warm colored lighting. The reason I put this article in here is it's not a great study in the fact that it's a small sample, and he put them, I believe, in chairs underneath streetlights. So feeling of safety, I don't know how effectual that is. We know that feeling of safety is something that is common where people are in light. They feel safer in light. That seems to be a common finding. However, this last one, the 6500 one, that's the first time I've seen it. It will probably need more study on that one. But the color temperature, the question I have is that it appears different cultures have different preferences for different color temperatures. And I know when I had Isa Muhammad on a number of months ago, he mentioned that in Caribbean, they like the white light. The white light, it feels better. It feels more natural. But when you go to America or Europe, they like the warmer light. Is this preference for color overblown? Is there something here that we need to be as mindful about color as I feel like Dark Sky tries to promote?
I met a young woman from Haiti a couple of years ago, and she was on a tour meeting with different, like city governments and things like that to learn about tourism in America. And so she was introduced to me to discuss the issue of astrotourism. As we were chatting, I was talking about how, where she lives, the skies are very, very, very dark. And I said, well, think about what an astrotourism industry could be in a place like that in Haiti. And she said, actually, in our culture, we do not go outside at night. She says, all the people I know, she says, we were raised that when it gets dark, you be inside. And so I wonder if it has something to do with how they were raised culturally to view the night.
I think it may have a cultural aspect to it, but it may be also how people in other countries perceive European and Americans. Like this summer, I was in Morocco and we went to a very beautiful desert. We were in Sahara and we were sleeping in a tent and it had very beautiful dark skies. But the whole camp had white lights everywhere. But if you go in a Moroccan city, like I'm not talking about Marrakesh, but where actually a lot of Moroccan people live, they will have minimum amount of light. So my perception here is like they will expect the tourists from Europe and America, like all around the world, will like that white light. This is one point. And the second point, I think it's also when the white bright light is perceived as something like very high civilized community. Like if we can have this light everywhere, that means that we are very developed. Maybe it's so true. I mean, I didn't do any research, but it's just a perception, I think. I see.
That makes a lot of sense.
I'm really skeptical about that result, and I think there are a number of really important counterexamples, but mostly I think there's a context that it ignores. The counterexamples include, for example, the city of Rome, the city of New York, city of Davis, California, which put in very bright, blue-rich color temperature lights, like 4,000, 5,000, and there was a revolt, and those cities all had to spend millions of dollars to rip them out and put in, mellower lights. And maybe what, the premise is, okay, well, those are all in the developed or overdeveloped and, global north and Western Europe and the United States, and we're talking about the other places. But the context is that the white light is new. It's brand new. It's so new, it's too new to study what those effects are. It's just new enough that we're just beginning to realize the terrible effects on human health and wildlife in the night sky that those blue rich white lights have. It's all because of the blue LEDs that enabled white LEDs to be brought to mass market. And that's less than 20 years old. All of us on this call and all the listeners were raised in a world that didn't have LEDs. We were raised in a world that had as a norm something like high pressure sodium lights or incandescent lights, which had much, much warmer colors, much, much less blue or zero blue. And the white LEDs are brand new. So what we need to remember is the white LEDs are being pushed by the industry, and they've been pushed also by governments that have focused on exclusively this one metric of efficiency, which is how much light you get out for the energy that goes in, lumens per watt. If you get more light out, that's a good thing. It doesn't matter if you have more light pollution. As long as you're using less energy to get each lumen of light out, that's a good thing. So, of course, that's a recipe for overlighting, and that's what happened. And unfortunately, the earliest LEDs were blue-rich. Those were slightly more efficient, or maybe significantly more efficient than the less blue, the more amber ones. Now that difference has gone away. Now the technology easily enables us to have very, very high efficiency, just maybe 1 or 2% less efficient in terms of lumens per watt, amber LEDs or 2200 Kelvin LED, which itself is not even as amber as the lights we all grew up with. So the industry has pushed the blue-rich white LED lights very, very strongly. The market is flooded with thousands of different companies, many of them based in China, supplying lights all over the world that are very, very blue-rich white. And the helpers of that industry include municipal and state and federal agencies that have helped push that in the name of energy efficiency. So there's this huge, huge push that is essentially marketing that has nothing to do with what people really want. There are lots of examples of, right here in Massachusetts, for example, small town, Pepperell, Massachusetts, population less than 5,000. Some dark sky advocates, mostly Tim Brothers and his friends, convince the town, oh, you're about to put up LED lights, please do a public test first, a demonstration, let the people decide. So they had a range of different color temperatures, different glares, different brightnesses, and guess what the people chose? They chose the least bright, least glare, least blue. And it turned out that was actually the cheapest one of all the sample. So the city saved all this money, and they got, in the end, 2200 Kelvin streetlights, and that's become a model for other towns in Massachusetts. So I really think public opinion actually will be on our side in the long run. I think it's going to happen around the world just like that.
I hope so. James. All right. Let's get into fun stuff here. Vicky, this was a really cool little piece that I came across. Does anyone know who Chappelle Roan is? Anyone listen to Chappelle Roan? Chappelle Roan, is that how you say her name?
Oh, Chappelle Roan. I've heard of her. I've heard a couple of her songs, but I don't listen to her. I'm too old for that.
As am I. It's definitely not my cup of tea. But apparently, Chappelle Roan had boosted interest in Saskatchewan, so much so that the province's Tourism Association put together a guide for prospective folks who are big fans of this musician that want to make a pilgrimage to Saskatchewan. Roan recently dropped a number 3 Billboard-ranked song called The Subway, which included the line, "F the city, I'm moving to Saskatchewan," to which she previously released the song Red Wine Supernova, which brings everything together for a special promotion between Cypress Hills Interprovincial Park, which is a dark sky preserve, and Cypress Hills Winery. That's pretty cool, Vicky. I don't know how often you see that. Do you ever see anything like that out there?
I don't think I've heard of that before. And I think it's really, really cool that a song can actually inspire astrotourism. I think we all have heard of songs that have inspired just regular tourism. I mean, you've got the famous Eagles song, "Take It Easy," where it talks about standing on the corner in Winslow, Arizona. And I'll tell you, Winslow, Arizona still owns that song to this day. It is, it's a big deal. And they're always like pushing for people to come and stand on the corner in Winslow. So we do have songs that have inspired people to visit specific places. I think it would be cool if we could get more artists to write about the night sky, maybe a little bit. I know Ed Sheeran, he's a huge astronomy geek. He has his own little observatory in his backyard. He has 2 daughters named Jupiter and Lyra. So he might be an easy person to hit up for writing a song to encourage people to go see the night sky.
Oh, that's great.
Last year, there was a fantastic symposium at Colgate University in Hamilton, New York, that I participated in, run by my astronomer colleague, Jeff Berry. He's from West Virginia, and he's very interested in Appalachian studies, and he's very close to a lot of different parts of different cultures in West Virginia, including some of the darkest skies east of the Mississippi. And at this symposium, there were coal miners who were world-class astrophotographers, and there were authors who write about the skies and the meaning of dark skies in their childhood and family heritage. And there were musicians who were all writing and singing about night skies. A bunch of them, now live in Nashville, and they're professional musicians, but we were treated to all these great songs about the stars in the night skies in West Virginia.
Oh, that it all sounds great to me. I mean, you're celebrating it, right? You're celebrating the emotion of it. So another astrotourism news. This one, Vicky, I held over just for you because I like this one. So folks up in our newly declared the 51st state of America, that is Canada, they have fancy plans and hopefully fancy pants to match. Over in New Brunswick, a man named Stefan Picard is looking to build the ultimate dark sky experience, a dark sky corridor linking 6 parks together, a collection of provincial, national, and municipal parks. The goal is to preserve the Bortle 2 communities and boost tourism to the area. Total mileage cover will be up to 112 miles. Per Elaine Shannon, the president of St. Martin's and the District Chamber of Commerce, instead of tourists just coming out for the day, going to the beach, having a bite to eat, and going back to the city, by having them stay overnight and the extra meals that they would have and the astrotourism activities, all the businesses were leaning in. And Picard noted that this additional measure of tourism could be impactful, mentioning $40 million in economic activity pertaining to recent solar eclipse, and now a spike due to the Aurora Borealis. The proposal will gather public input from the 5,300 folks that live there before anything can be moved to be improved upon. Vicky, you're in the biz. What is the tale of the economic impact in places to have astrotourism?
Well, first of all, I know Stefan. He's been a guest on my podcast, and we have been on Zoom, just private conversations over the last couple of years, just talking about ideas for astrotourism, ideas to engage more people, offer more unique things. And I think that's one of the things he's getting really good at, is offering really unique things. He had, like you mentioned, he had the total solar eclipse. He had this whole event package, multi-day event up there, sold out. And so it's really incredible what we're seeing happen. And, I mentioned before that Arizona is kind of nicknamed the astronomy state. So Arizona has a lot at stake when it comes to protecting the sky for optical astronomy, which has been a $1.3 billion investment. And the return on that investment in terms of tourism, the best that I have been able to find, and even the tourism board in my community, is about $250 million. Because you have now these places, observatories and places like that also offer to astrotourism experiences. So it is huge in Arizona. It's a massive part of our tourism industry. Fountain Hills, where I live, we're building this International Dark Sky Discovery Center. And let me tell you that our town officials and our tourism department are just chomping at the bit for this thing to open because of the economic impact it's going to have for our community. Bringing people here who would never have thought to come out to our neck of the woods on the edge of Phoenix. And there was a study that was done, it was back in 2019. This was for the Colorado Plateau. So we're talking, southern Utah, northern Arizona. I think it goes over into Utah in the corner of Colorado there. And this study in 2019 estimated that there would be about $5.8 million over one decade, creating 10,000 jobs just from astrotourism. Now, of course, we know we had a pandemic during that, so I have no idea where they're at in reaching those numbers. But we know that the economic impact is growing like crazy because all these places are becoming certified dark sky parks. In the Colorado Plateau, you've got Cedar Breaks National Monument, Bryce Canyon, Zion, Grand Canyon, and then you've got Moab and Canyonlands. I mean, there's so many of them, and they're all getting certified as dark sky parks. They're hosting massive annual star parties. Grand Canyon does an 8-day star party every single summer. And then other stargazing programs, astronomer in residence programs. I talked a little bit about Flagstaff. Some of the businesses in town are taking hold of that dark sky thing and creating businesses around the concept. So the stakes in tapping into astrotourism is really high, and it brings a lot of tourist money in really, really interesting ways.
I was just going to add, here east of the Mississippi, some of the only dark sky places are in northern Maine, where there are two, Katahdin Woods and Waters and Appalachian Mountain Club's Maine Woods. And those are both dark sky places certified. And they have found, just in the few years since certification, that there's a huge spike in visitors coming for their dark skies. Something like 50% of the visitors now are new visitors who are there because they heard about the dark sky certification.
Well, how about this? Why do you need to go anywhere? There's a traveling roadshow out in the UK that will come and visit you, kind of. Over in the Howardian Hills National Landscape Zone of England, dark sky advocate Richard Darn shows people what they could be missing. When the show comes to town, expect a multicultural look at the constellations. Darn utilizes aids such as a free planetarium software called Stellarium, which is a great little tool to help illustrate the night sky, help illustrate different cultures' night sky, provide warm drinks, and it is able to impact he's counted 400 people in an area that consists of only thousands of residents. So the team actually uses outreach to show how poorly angled and poorly utilized lighting is in our communities and tries to promote responsible practices and responsible fixtures, including the work of converting around 60 exterior lights to be dark sky compliant. That's pretty great stuff. Again, using astrotourism to kind of benefit the health of the community. And let's end with this one. All right, you listener, if you've been listening for a while, are undoubtedly aware of the Maori New Year at astrourism, that being what else here in the States call the Pleiades. There doesn't seem to be a culture more fervent on preserving their nighttime heritage in the Maori. Nighttime did more than just provide cues for seasonal changes and New Year's. The stars operated as kind of like an ancient hard drive for Maori knowledge and heritage as they crossed through the South Island of New Zealand. Way back in 2004, Nagoya University in Japan teamed up with multiple universities in New Zealand to install the 1.8-meter microlensing observatory observational telescope. Not familiar with what that guy does? Neither was I. The MOA, the microlensing observations in astrophysics, looks for planets and dark matter. At the same time, travel agent and tourist Hide Oswala happened to be hanging around the area, and he connected with a businessman named Graham Murray. Graham already operated an air tourism business named Air Safaris. When they teamed up, they recognized the uniqueness of having these pristine skies, Mackenzie Basin, and they started to try and gain tour approvals for the observatory under the name of Earth and Sky. By 2012, the region had attained a gold status dark sky reserve, and a handful of years later, Nagai Tuhu Tourism Group partnered with Earth and Sky to create what we know as the Dark Sky Project. And the project does more than just show people impressive views of the southern sky. It retells the details locked up in the night sky to individuals who are willing to listen. The facility itself houses a museum focusing on science and the culture of the region. They run guided tours for around 25 to 100 USD, depending on what package you want, as the seasons are flipped down under. I mean, this is a perfect time to start planning out your trip down there this winter from the north. I want to finish with this last piece. The facility houses the 18-inch Bashir telescope that was originally part of University of Pennsylvania's Flower Observatory out of Lansdowne, PA. Percival Lowell actually used this scope to observe sunlight reflecting off of Martian ice caps, and the scope eventually made its way out to University of Canterbury, who then gifted it to a rehab team, and it now stands as a relic of a bygone age of visual astronomy. The observatory turned 20 this past June, which is 1 year after Hide and Graham's initial astrotourism collaboration started. That is a hell of a tale of a night sky tourism adventure. Vicky, if you had just one thing that you would tell people to do for astrotourism, what's your favorite? What do you think? You've had a lot of stuff on your show.
Oh, man, I would say, just from my personal experience, that if someone has never seen the Milky Way, like really bright, unmistakable, saw the Milky Way, that I would encourage them to do everything in their power to make plans to go somewhere that's really dark. And if they can't, if it's not in the budget to fly to some fancy place or to go to the Dark Sky Project in New Zealand, or come to Arizona, pack up a tent, go somewhere really dark, go see the Milky Way, because there is something really magical about that. And I always encourage people to plan to spend at least an hour under the sky, especially when you can see the Milky Way like that, because the longer you stand there, the more your eyes adapt, the more you're going to, on your own, discover things up there where you're like, what is that? And what's that over there? I did this with my husband recently, and we just took some inexpensive binoculars, and I gave them to him. I said, whenever you see something you're like, what is that? Look through the binoculars. They cost like $40, $50. And he looked through the binoculars and he's like, oh my gosh, I've never seen so many stars in my life. And what he saw with the naked eye was this really large star cluster. So when he looked up with the binoculars, that's what he saw it on his own, and it was incredible. Or to see this little smudge of a cloud on a cloudless night. Look through the binoculars and he realized that's a nebula. And it's so powerful to be able to see those things, spot them on your own under a very dark sky. The amount of awe and wonder that it inspires inside of you can't be matched in almost any other way. Looking through a telescope at even the moon, at Jupiter and Saturn, I have people, I'm not kidding you, I ask other people who do telescope stuff with people, what reaction do you usually get from someone when they look at Saturn and its rings for the first time in your telescope? And I would say 92% of the time, they all say the same thing, that people walk up and they look, it's quiet for a second, and then they go, oh my God. Everybody says it. And then they follow it up with the next question, is that real? And so these experiences, I wish them for everybody. And so it's worth whatever effort it takes to go see the Milky Way. Summertime is the best time to see it. Or to go to a stargazing program when you know you're going to be able to see Saturn or Jupiter, because it really does something deep inside of you. And you will always want to protect the night sky after that.
Yeah, that's amazing what you were sharing. I mean, it's super inspiring. I sometimes join my friends who do the street astronomy in Brussels. Every time there are people who never seen a moon. Like, I'm not talking about like Saturn or something, just the moon. But what I wanted to add also, I want to brag a little bit by the end of the episode. I actually visited Dark Sky Project in New Zealand. I got this privilege. And it was very interesting for me to see Southern Hampshire. It's also very unique. Like, I'm surrounded by night sky stuff. Like, I'm within the advocacy. But when you see the sky another way around, it's also a very unique experience. Like, you never saw that before. You don't see the Big Bear and the stuff which we see every time. They have completely different sky. And the Dark Sky Project in New Zealand there, it's actually building up the whole tourism around it, and the whole development in that area is all around the dark sky tourism. So it's very interesting how they do it. They also have a very interesting activity. You can swim under the night sky. So they have like a spa area. So I think, yeah, it's really nice and fascinating.
And they have a restaurant there too, don't they?
They have everything. It's all about dark skies. Like, everything you do, it has dark sky, and it's like there's like basic stuff, basic for people who are involved in light pollution. I mean, like the observation, the excursions, the walks, the nighttime walks, but also like some fancy stuff like swimming. There's also a wild lake there. So it's super beautiful area as well. I really recommend everybody, if you have a chance to go there. It was a magical experience.
There you go. Yeah, we saw one of the best Milky Ways I've ever seen in my life when we went up to Ray Lakes this past trip. And it was clear. And the moment the sun went down, that Milky Way popped up. I've never seen it so quick. Even from Big Bend, it was just like so quick. It was great. That's a great sales pitch there, Yana. I think, you might get a few. So sounds good. I want to thank my guests for joining and staying for the whole show this month. We had a little bit of a time delay and some issues on my end, but I want to thank you guys again. Where can people find you, James? Where can they learn more about what you're up to?
I'm on the usual Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram. I also have a small sort of static website at my Smith College address, which has a light pollution page, and I invite people to come find me there. And I also want to just invite people to get organized and to do all the inspiring things that Vicky and Yana talked about, and go out and see it for yourself. But take action in your local community, and don't do it alone. Just find a small group of people who are like-minded and start meeting regularly. Pick a small project. There are lots of good examples out there. If you're not already an advocate or an activist, you don't have to invent the wheel yourself. Lots of resources at Dark Sky International. Get involved and start something. And if you're on a campus in the United States, then look at campusshine.org, which lays it all out. Here's what you have to do. Here are the resources. Here are the PowerPoint slides. You don't have to invent it yourself, but don't do it alone. Start a small group. Vicky, where can people learn more about Night Sky Tourist Podcast, Night Sky, the services you offer for tourism?
Yeah, nightskytourist.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, and my podcast can be found on most podcast platforms, also under the name Night Sky Tourist. And if you are coming to the Phoenix area, look me up, because we offer a lot of experiences here for the public. And I will also do private stargazing experiences for just small groups of people who want to have a really incredible experience under the night sky here in Arizona.
Sounds good. And Yana, where can folks learn all about the projects you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to connect with me is always via LinkedIn, but also feel free to check the website of our Plan B project, which is Plan B EU project, to be precise to find it. We will share soon more information about the work we're doing and the resources about mitigation of light pollution.
Excellent. I want to share this programming note before we close tonight. Be sure to stick around to the end of the shows. I'll have some listener feedback that'll air, and then I'll also be covering some of the ecology stuff that we didn't cover in this episode due to time constraints. I want to thank my guests one more time. Thank you at home for joining us today. And as a reminder, this show is listener supported. We rely exclusively on support from you, listener. If you like what you hear, why not support the show? The show is recorded on September 21st. You can learn more about today's show by visiting our website, lightpollutionnews.com. Keep an eye out for us on whatever social media you use. We're probably there. Thank you once again. I'm your host, Bill McGeaney, reminding you to only shine the light where it's needed. On the ecology front, I'm sure you've heard the news. It's that after looking at the behavior of 583 bird species, researchers found that light pollution extended the daily activity for birds by 50 minutes. The most impacted were the species which either possessed larger eyes, open nests, migratory habits, or were birds that were experiencing a breeding season. This probably isn't a shocker, as it confirms prior studies in this regard that artificial light at night may extend activity level of birds, and sometimes at the expense of their cognitive abilities and habitat hatching success. The team relied on data from a citizen science project called Bird Weather. Birds in the brightest areas added 32 minutes of activity to their evenings and 18 minutes of activity to their mornings. There was also a more targeted study of zebra finches that found dim nighttime environments actually affected birds' sleep quality. So it's dim lighting in nighttime environments. Namely, the birds woke up more often through the night and earlier in the morning. The study also looked at how specific wavelengths of light affected finches. It assessed that a broadband wavelength of 400 to 700 nanometers, a red wavelength at 600 nanometers, and a blue wavelength at 460 nanometers. All light was set to 5 lux, or the equivalent of a faint moonlight, or a shadow casting the amount of light from a distant street light. The blue and broadband lighting influenced birds to gain weight through increased foraging and affected their metabolism ability to properly process sugars. In a study out of the International Journal of Avian Science, researchers performed a review of 39 studies from 1945 onward to identify how artificial light at night and noise affected owls. All up, the studies barely put a dent in studying owls, only looking at 25 U.S.-based owl species out of an estimated 250 species. As is expected, with regards to artificial light at night, owls experienced a mixed bag of impacts. Owls typically remained quieter or were found in less densities in lit environments. It's surmised by the researchers that light may benefit insect-eating owls, but be a detriment to rodent-hunting owls. When taken together with noise pollution, owls tended to experience lower breeding success and population reductions in affected areas. In addition, both pollutants may impair the owl's health by stressing the owl, as has been seen in certain species of songbirds. More research, though, is needed. So one of my favorite summertime noisemakers, that being crickets. The Australian field cricket was looked at in 3 different environments, the urban, semi-rural, and rural, progressing from bright to dark nights respectively. The study found that urban crickets had become quite adapted to their new 24/7 daylight environments. Crickets living in Melbourne took the slowest amount of time to develop and tended to be larger than the other 2 sets. They appeared to have consistent behavior regardless if in light or in dark environments. However, all crickets studied experienced shorter lifespans under artificial light, regardless of where they lived. Male crickets had a rougher, scoring lower in a body condition measure when exposed to artificial light, regardless of where they lived. But females also had a problem in that they were less interested in finding a mate under artificial light at night. The study used 10 lux in the artificial light experiment and 0.01 lux in the control night condition. I have some listener feedback that I want to include in the show here. I'm going to read what they sent over. I'm going to try and provide some of the context. I'm not going to be great at it, but here, let's go through it. So this first one comes from a Shirley Sinclair, and it's in regard to the new lights that are going up in South Tyneside over in England. My first question out to Shirley, we've been talking back and forth, was there a consultation with residents, as was implied in what the town council sent out? Per Shirley, your first question, well, actually, the council would consider that they consulted with the residents, but it was not the kind of consultation that results in a change or even in mutual understanding. I became involved after residents were invited to join a focus group, and I decided to take part, knowing nothing of the story but caring very much for our local environment. That was not the beginning of the story. And there was also a bunch of annoyed residents who had been protesting for several months about the impending light installation. There had already been a discussion between the council and the National Trust, who owns the Lees, which is a grassy coastal area which will be impacted by these lights. The focus group was set up to try and alleviate concerns, and it included council officers, local councilors, lighting consultants, and the National Trust representative, as well as local residents. This official group met twice, with the National Trust actually being missed out of the first meeting invitation. This process largely operated as a way of explaining to us the council's position, but did not take on board our concerns, input, or suggestions. Alongside the official group meetings, we formed a loose team of focus group members and concerned citizens known as PODS, Protect Our Dark Skies, with members who had varying skills in areas such as lighting, environment, safety, astronomy, and art. We were proactive as a group and put a lot of pressure on the councilors and the council officers, sending in freedom of information requests to the council, doing our own research, challenging report conclusions, arranging individual meetings with councilors, rallying public support, and even gaining the support of our local member of parliament. The National Trust conducted their own environmental reports to the council and also came up with several suggestions of alternative low-level or solar lighting solutions. None of this resulted in any significant change in the council's plan, which was very firmly set in stone, the lampposts having been bought and kept in storage for over 1 year already. That is why I say it was the appearance of consultation, but rather one side, it lacked any real substance. Second question from me. Do you know the council's motivation for bypassing the residents' concerns? And this is Shirley's response. There are different ideas about the council's motivation, but I can give you the stated reasons. There was a final report given by the council officers to the decision-making cabinet of councilors with a support of their finding and advice. It stated the safety audit, which was undertaken as part of the decision-making process, showed significant safety risks along the cycleway. It also said that the environmental assessment had shown that there would be no significant impact on local wildlife habitats and dark skies. That mitigation would help reduce impact, and the national guidance required the lighting. So who can argue with this? Well, we have certainly tried to. The safety audit that was done makes many recommendations, which the council simply set aside as not feasible. Two ideas are prominent, which are a reduction in speed and also lighting the pathway. A trial period of speed reduction which was followed, and as far as I know, there have been no significant problems arising from this. The other solutions were suggested by the National Trust, but rejected for a mix of financial and unspecified practical reasons. Rather than carefully assessed to see if they would satisfy audit criteria, some highlighted areas of risk were already lit. The applicability of guidance, which is cited as requiring lighting to be provided, is open to challenge. So no overwhelming need was demonstrated, yet this was relayed by council spokespeople to the public, and in fact, as we see, relayed as far to the U.S. in your own podcast. A simple story can be told about lighting impact and environmental assessments, which were incomplete and did not take account of the council's own environmental policies. There were well-qualified individuals in PODS who questioned the assessment and sent in their detailed comments. Light will inevitably spill onto the grassland. Otherwise, it could not light the cycleway, which sits on the edge of the grassland. Indirect, obtrusive light needs to be taken into account. It will contribute to sky glow or reflect upwards from the road and grass, and wildlife will be impacted adversely. Dark sky compliance really requires the first principles to be followed, which can be summed up as don't use light where it's not needed. As I think you said, the National Trust representative also said there always has to be a balance in weighing the factors of needed light and environmental protection. It isn't straightforward, and people have many different priorities. However, we are in an era of devastating threat to biodiversity, and this area is at risk. David Smith from Bug Life talked about the massive threat to pollinating insects that's posed from artificial light. We have several protected species of seabirds nesting nearby, which need special consideration. There is a distinctive stretch of magnesium limestone grassland, of which this area is part, which is home to many rare plants. Local residents love and treasure this area of coastal grassland, with wonderful dark sky leading onto the wide ocean beyond, and they believe that lighting is a complete negation of this precious gift. In a nutshell, they are heartbroken. Thank you for your interest, Shirley Sinclair. Thank you, Shirley, for the comment, and we wish you the best in what the community is going for, and I hope for a positive resolution for all involved. I have a second comment from Rick Kuchin. Rick, I really appreciate you reaching out. Let's go through what you said. Really enjoyed podcasts. Don't know if this is worth correcting, but your recent story said that the cost of renting a pier at Starfront is as high as $800. This isn't correct. The highest cost pier is $399. The whole point of Starfront is that it's hugely cheaper than any other remote hosting site. Just check out Sierra Remote Observatories, etc. for comparison. There are many others too. Rick, I looked at this. I looked it up, and you know what? There might be some confusion here because the article I used initially as a source was a Petapixel article, which cited the $800. I went out to the website and it cited $800. And then there's another website that looks like it's from the same company, Starfront, that is $399. So I think somewhere in between, they may have changed prices or something. They have two concurrent websites, and one of them lists a different price than this 800 one. And it could be that the 800 bucket wasn't around when they initially did the first website. And it's, to be clear, the 800 bucket is for people who have ultra large piers, really big telescopes. We're not talking about your average SMIC-CAS. You know, we're talking about some really big scopes. That's like the premium side of this offering. So Rick, thank you for reaching out. Shirley, thank you for reaching out. I always love to hear from you guys. If you guys want to send over comments, bill@lightpollutionnews.com. Read them on air. We can discuss them. It's always great hearing from you guys. Thank you again for your support, and I hope you guys continue to listen.